We married in the rain. Not a miserable, soul-drenching downpour, but a soft, persistent autumn drizzle that beaded on the shoulders of my rented suit and clung to Clara's eyelashes, making them look like tiny, dark jewels. People say rain on your wedding day is good luck. A wet knot is harder to untie, they tell you, a folksy platitude offered with a reassuring squeeze of the arm. We held on to that, believing our knot was not just tied but fused. The first 2 years were a testament to that belief. They were a blur of shared takeout containers eaten on the floor of our first sparsely furnished apartment, of lazy Sunday mornings tangled in sheets, the outside world a muffled hum beyond our window. We were building a life on the shaky foundations of youthful optimism and genuine, heart-aching love. I loved the way Clara's brow furrowed in concentration when she was reading, the way she'd tuck a stray strand of auburn hair behind her ear. I loved the sound of her laughter, a sudden, bright peal that could cut through my darkest moods. We were a team. We were inevitable. I was a junior graphic designer then, full of ideas and ambition but short on influence. Clara was finishing her residency, a grueling marathon of sleep-deprived nights and emotionally draining days that left her hollowed out. I'd watch her come home, the vibrant energy she once radiated dimmed to a low, flickering pilot light. She'd shed her scrubs like a second skin, stand under the shower for 20 minutes without moving, and emerge wrapped in a towel, her eyes 1,000 miles away. Tough day? I'd ask, the question already answered by the slump of her shoulders. You have no idea, she'd murmur, and the chasm between our two worlds would feel a little wider. Our intimacy, once the fiery core of our relationship, began to cool. It wasn't a sudden dousing but a slow, creeping frost. Attempts felt clumsy, ill-timed. I'd reach for her in the dark and find her tense, her mind still pacing the hospital corridors. The rejections were never cruel, always couched in apologies and exhaustion, but they accumulated like tiny paper cuts, each one stinging more than the last. I started to feel less like a husband and more like a roommate, a caretaker. And with that feeling came a quiet, insidious companion, resentment. It was a poison I didn't know how to name. I loved her, of course I did. I admired her dedication, her strength. But I also missed the woman I had married. I missed feeling wanted. In the lonely hours while she was on a 36-hour shift, the silence of our apartment would start to feel accusatory. It was in that silence that I began to wonder, in a whisper I barely admitted to myself, if this was it. If this was the rest of my life. The knot, the one we tied in the rain, didn't feel strong anymore. It felt like a noose. The internet was my escape. It was a window out of the quiet apartment, a portal to a world where I wasn't just a tired husband waiting for his even more tired wife. I found forums for designers, places where I could talk about fonts and kerning with people who understood, who shared my passion. It was innocent, a digital pub where I could unwind. That's where I met Serafina. Her screen name was a joke, she'd later tell me, a relic from a teenage obsession with Gothic novels. Her real name was Chloe. She was a web developer from the other side of the country, sharp, funny, and, most importantly, available. Our conversation started in the public forums, dissecting a client's terrible logo choice or celebrating a new piece of software. Soon we moved to private messages. We talked about everything and nothing. Her terrible dates, my creative frustrations. We never spoke about my marriage. It was an unspoken boundary. She knew I was married, I'd mentioned it once early on. But in our digital bubble, that fact seemed to belong to another reality. With Chloe, I wasn't Clara's husband. I was just Leo. The shift was subtle. A good morning message that I woke up eager to see. A conversation that lasted late into the night, my face illuminated by the glow of the laptop screen while my wife slept soundlessly beside me. The compliments started, first about my work, then about my sense of humor, then about me. I found myself dressing better, not for Clara, but for the tiny, pixelated avatar on my screen. Then came Skype. Seeing her for the first time was a jolt. She was pretty, with dark, curious eyes and a smile that was somehow both shy and mischievous. Hearing her voice made her real, and the reality of it was both terrifying and intoxicating. Our chats became a daily ritual. I'd wait for Clara's car to pull out of the driveway before I'd log on, my heart thudding with a mixture of guilt and anticipation. The conversations grew bolder. Flirtation bled into something more. One evening, after a particularly frustrating day where Clara had fallen asleep mid-sentence while I was talking, I logged on feeling a desperate need for connection. Chloe was there, a sympathetic ear. She doesn't see me, I typed, the words flowing out of me before I could stop them. I feel invisible. I see you, she replied. That was it. That was the spark that lit the fuse. The conversation that followed was a torrent of pent-up frustration and longing. The compliments became more personal, the language more charged. We were walking a tightrope and we both knew it. The first time she suggested we turn on our cameras while we talked, I felt a sickening lurch in my stomach. It was wrong. It was a line. I crossed it without a second thought. For the next few months, that was our life. A sordid, secret world that existed only through the laptop lens. It was a fantasy, a compartmentalized rebellion against the quiet disappointment my real life had become. I talked to Chloe in ways I hadn't talked to my own wife in years. I told her she was beautiful. I told her I couldn't stop thinking about her. And, in the deepest pit of my betrayal, I complained about my marriage. I told her about my doubts, my loneliness, my fear that I had made a terrible mistake. I painted Clara as a work-obsessed, sexless drone and myself as a tragic, neglected husband. Every word was a brick in the wall I was building between myself and my wife, and every keystroke was a betrayal far deeper than the sexual acts themselves. The deception was all-consuming. I cleared my browser history obsessively. I used headphones, my back always to the door. I lived on a knife's edge of adrenaline and shame. And like all people who live on a knife's edge, I was destined to fall. It was a Tuesday. Clara had been switched to a day shift for the week, a rare reprieve that should have felt like a gift. She was in the other room, humming along to the radio. I had been using the laptop for work and had closed it, but I'd forgotten to quit Skype. I hadn't used it in a couple of days and the vigilance had slackened. She came into the living room holding 2 cups of tea. "Thought you might like one," she said, her smile the first genuine one I'd seen in days. "Thanks," I said, my own smile feeling like a cheap mask. She sat down on the couch and picked up the laptop. "Mind if I check my email quickly? My phone's about to die." Panic, cold and absolute, seized me. "Sure, just a sec, let me just..." But it was too late. She'd already opened the lid. The screen flickered to life and there it was. The Skype window opened to my last conversation with Chloe. A conversation filled with graphic details and promises of what we'd do next time. I watched her face as she read. I saw the confusion morph into disbelief, and the disbelief curdle into a look of such profound, gut-wrenching pain that it knocked the air from my lungs. Her hand went to her mouth, her knuckles white. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just made a small, wounded sound like an animal that had been struck. "Leo," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What is this? Who is Serafina?" The room tilted. The air grew thick and heavy. This was it. The moment of impact. In that split second, 2 thoughts fired in my brain. The first was a primal, selfish urge: deny, delete, destroy. The second was a twisted, pathetic attempt at chivalry: don't let her read what I said about her. The things I'd written about our marriage, about her, felt 1,000 times more poisonous than the sexting. I didn't want her to see that ugliness. I wanted to protect her from the full extent of my betrayal. That's the lie I told myself. "Give me that," I said, my voice harsher than I intended. I lunged for the laptop. Her fingers tightened on it, a reflexive act of defiance. For a horrible second, we were wrestling for it, this piece of metal and plastic that held the evidence of my broken vows. I was stronger. I wrenched it from her grasp, my fingers fumbling on the trackpad. I selected the entire chat history. My thumb hovered over the delete button. "Leo, no. Don't you dare," she cried, her voice finally breaking. But I did. I clicked. And with a single, irreversible action, I erased it all. I erased Chloe. I erased the sexting. And I erased the cruel, damning words I had written about my own wife. I stood there, panting, the laptop in my hands like a weapon. I looked at Clara. Her face was a mask of shock and devastation. She had seen enough to know the what, but I had just stolen the how and the why from her. "It was just online," I stammered, the words tasting like ash. It meant nothing. She meant nothing. But we both knew that was a lie. The proof wasn't just in what I had done, but in the frantic, desperate way I had just hidden it. I hadn't just cheated. I had, in that moment, shown her that my priority was not her healing, but my own self-preservation. I had deleted the evidence to save myself from having to answer for the things I could not defend. And in doing so, I had left a gaping black hole of doubt and unanswered questions that would poison us for years to come. The knot was untied. And I was the one who had pulled the thread.